The alt art craze is finally over, I hope. Of course, there will always be those channels that pump out 20 videos a day just spewing shit about the topic. I literally saw this channel where this guy just shits out pokey investing videos like there's no tomorrow in the most monotone voice. The shit will put you to sleep, like my videos. On a different note, instead of milking this shit, we're going to take a look at the current market of alt arts today. We will be covering every alt art from the Sword and Shield era in speedrun fashion, while looking at three things. The price they were before the boom of 2024, so we're talking beginning January of 2024. The price that they were at their highest point during the boom, and then lastly, the price that they are today. I will also be highlighting each alt art under three categories: red, yellow, and green. Red indicates that the price of these cards are still too high in my opinion, or there just hasn't been really any movement in the cards with their prices. Yellow, these cards have moved a little in price, but it's still hard to tell whether or not it's worth buying it at their current price. And finally, green, which indicates that most of the prices have fallen close to what their original amount was before the boom, or at least close enough to where you're only spending a few dollars more to get the card. I will just give my opinions, if anything, and just don't take them to heart. Just don't even do anything with this information. Just stop watching this video right now. We haven't even started. The first set to start us off is Battle Styles with 6 alt arts. We have the Empoleon V with its dick out, sitting at $24.15 at the beginning of January this year, and at its highest point was at $46.03 in May, and now has gone down to $37.75. So it has dropped a little bit, about $10, but is still roughly about $13 more than what it cost at the beginning of the year. So I can see this card still going down in value over time. If you really like this card, then just get it. Then we have the Tyranitar V passed out under a tree, sitting at $90.48 at the beginning of this year. In June, during the bang, this card literally jumped $100, going to $190.59 in June. Today it sits at $148.79, so practically $50, well, $40, $42 less than what it was today. I still find this card not really worth it because it's not even close to what it's sat at. Not saying this card will reach its previous price point, but would be nice if this card comes down to around 110, 120. Then we have the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, was $12.44 at the beginning of the year, and really only moved up a couple dollars, sitting at $18.94 today, which is its current highest price. Something we will see is that these cheaper alt arts really haven't moved all too much in price, and honestly, whether or not they have gone down to their original price point, for so cheap, I actually think it's just worth buying no matter what the price is. If you're really content on saving $5, then that's on you. Next up is its VMAX counterpart, the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX, sitting at $28.17 at the beginning of the year, has gone up roughly $25 or so to $54.01 in June, and today only went down $1, currently sitting at $53.54. Currently not the best price to pick it up at, and really hasn't moved much since its peak, so would just probably advise watching this card and not jumping at anything too crazy. Taking a look at the Rapid Strike Urshifu V, this card was sitting at $12.33 at the beginning of the year and had only gone up $2 at its biggest boom at $14.61 in May. Talk about a real bang. Went down another dollar, sitting in between its highest and lowest points at $13.59. Again, just another great cheap pickup. Don't even think about it when you're buying it. Then we have the Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX at $57.90 back in January. At its peak, it jumped up $20 to $75.38 in June, and then has gone down $5 today, sitting at $70.18. Just like the other VMAX, the price is pretty high, so I would just watch it and see if it goes down before jumping on it. Moving over to Chilling Reign with 13 alt arts, we start with the Blissey V. Was $17.07 back in January, and then at its highest point in May was at $29.08. today. Currently has gone down a few dollars to $25.04 and kind of sits in a nice median price from its lowest to its highest. So it's really a toss-up whether or not you would buy it, but honestly, it's a cheaper card, so it really wouldn't matter all too much if you pulled the trigger on this card. Then we have an interesting one with the Tornadus V. Back in January, this card was sitting at $19.99, so $20, and currently it's at its highest point today, which is $30.25. I mean, it's really only $10 more, but there really hasn't been any movement with this card, so this card could still potentially drop in value, so I would just think about that before purchasing this. Then we have the Zero Aura V at $40.76 in January. At May was its highest point at $61.76, and today sits at $42.80. This is a card to definitely pick up. It is currently sitting $2 more than what it was back in January. It's basically the same price as it was before the craze. So definitely a card to really jump on if you want it. Just be aware, even though I'm saying it's a great buy, these cards can still drop down in value. They could shoot up in value. I cannot predict the market. I wish I could. If I could, I would predict the fucking lottery and win $1 million and die in a boat with a bunch of men. I mean women. Then we have the most disgusting card in this set, the Blaziken VMAX, lifting its fucking leg. This card just irritates me with its price. This card was sitting at $165.96 in January, too high for my taste to even begin with. At its highest point in May, this card jumped up to $405.15. I don't know who the fuck put that at its price point. And today has dropped a little under $100 at $323.96. In my opinion, I'm not even touching this card with a stick. I don't even want this card until it hits back to around $100 to $200. Then I might jump on this card, but to me, I really don't care enough to even bother with it. So if you like this card, if you're a Blaziken Blazer, I don't know what to tell you. This card's just like gonna cost you a house. Then we have the Galarian Slowking V, which is also sitting in a weird position. Its lowest point in January was sitting at $26.91 and then went up to $42.18 in May and now sits at $34.91, so a little between halfway from January to its highest point. And then we have the Galarian Rapidash V, a gorgeous card. In January was at $38.22. In June jumped up to $66.24, basically almost double, and now sits at $59.35. Really hasn't gone down all that much, only like $7. So it's still sitting at $60 where it was originally around $40. So that's like a $20 difference. Up to you whether or not you really want that card, but it is a really gorgeous card. And if there is to ever be another big jump with alt arts, I feel like that's definitely a card that will eventually go back up again. Then we have the 3 Galarian birds, starting with the Galarian Zapdos V at $41.58 in January, jumped up to $60.73 in June, and has gone down only $4 today, sitting at $56.62. Not really that great of a buy. It is a Galarian bird, which is pretty cool, pretty popular, but really this card will probably still go down in value, I would hope, I would think. And we have the Galarian Articuno V sitting at $38.22 back in January, has gone up to $75.81 in June at its highest point, basically beat the Zapdos. A gorgeous Articuno trapped in its fucking ball, and then today sits at $64.38. Basically has gone down a little bit, but still almost like the Zapdos sits at 2 times its price. So honestly, I don't think this is good for its value and would probably wait to see if this card goes down in value before buying. To finish out our Galarian birds, we have the Galarian Moltres V, was sitting at $129.56 for quite a while back in January, and then jumped up to $181.76 in June. It has gone down about $33 to $147.16, but still sits about $20 more than what it originally costed. This card is a more expensive card, so when you look at it, $20 really isn't too big of a deal. For me, if I didn't have this card, I would definitely contemplate buying it. Whether or not it will go back down to $130, it could possibly. With the hype dying down, I see most of these cards continuing to just fall $1 here, $1 there. I really can't see too many of these cards still going up in value now that the hype is dead. Just wait for your local friendly YouTuber to bring the hype back up again. Then we have what I think is the most underrated alt arts in Chilling Reign, and that is the Ice Riders and Shadow Riders. So we have the Ice Rider Calyrex V, was $13.62 back in January, jumped up only $7 to $20.28 in June during the hype, and has gone down $1 since then, sitting at $19.57 today. I honestly think this is a great card to pick up just to have in your collection, a gorgeous Ice Rider alt art. Not really a popular Pokemon, but to me the art for the card is just so nice. I would buy it no matter what. Then we have its VMAX counterpart, the Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX, was at $37.25 back in January, went up to $57.78 in June, and has stayed practically the same today at $57.61, so really has only gone down like 10 cents, not even. It's at its current point, basically. This card, I definitely would not suggest getting. I think it still has a way to go down. I can still see this card possibly getting to 50 to 45 to potentially $40 back to what it was before. Then we have the Shadow Rider Calyrex V at $19.03, jumped up to $26.24 in June, and then only went down $2 to $24.75. This card is pretty gorgeous. I mean, from its lowest point in January, it has only gone up like $5, so I would probably still jump on this if you don't have it. Just gorgeous fucking dark emo goth horse in the fucking like woods at night. What a card. Then we have the Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX at $51.02 back in January. Currently it is at its highest point at $110.55, so we haven't seen this card go down in value. Honestly, it is a really gorgeous card that I would think would be worth around $100, so I honestly don't really see this card moving too much, but at one point, this card was, again, $51, so hey, it could drop down in value. Taking a look at one of the craziest sets in all of Sword and Shield, we obviously have Evolving Skies at 17 alt arts. The first card on this list, we have the Noivern V, which was sitting at $25.30 back in January, jumped up about $20 to $45.91 in June, and has only gone down about $7 to $38.44. For me, this is a card that I still need, so I'm probably going to wait till it goes maybe around $30 or so, and then probably jump on it. Noivern is not a popular Pokemon at all. Most people wouldn't even like spend 2 seconds to look at Noivern, so really he can just off himself if he wanted to. This card, it's an card. Not really a fan favorite in Evolving Skies. I don't even think people know this card exists in Evolving Skies. Then we have the Medicham V at $12.38 in January, went up $3 to $15.02 in June, and has gone down practically what it was before in January at $12.43. So definitely a card to just buy if you need it. We have the Golurk V at $13 back in January, has crazy enough jumped up $20 to $33.39 in May at its highest point, and then just immediately lost it all, and today sits at $18.76. Again, not a bad buy, only a couple dollars more than what it was in January. Then we have the Dragonite V sitting at $93.20 back in January, went up $100 to $193.48 in June, and then dropped about $50 or so to $136.75. This card is kind of in the middle range. I mean, personally, I still need this card. I probably would wait till this hits 110, 120 again, and then maybe I'll probably jump on it. Then we have Duraludon V at $10.77 in January, went up $4 to $14.83 in June, and then dropped $1, sits at $13.62 today. Really not much movement at all. Definitely a card to buy if you still need it. Then we got the Duraludon VMAX at $17.06 back in January, went up about $10 to $26.05 in June, and then has dropped basically $10 back to $17.20. So actually only went up really 14 cents since the fucking boom. So definitely it's a great card to buy in my opinion, because it's a VMAX and it's pretty fucking cool. Then you have the Rayquaza V that was sitting at $75.99 in January, went up to $149.13 in May, and then has dropped down to $111.15. I would probably wait for this card to hit $100 or possibly $90. But again, that's if this card falls. It's a Rayquaza. It's a fan favorite. It's from Evolving Skies. And we have Rayquaza VMAX, which crazy enough, outbeat the fucking Giratina V in Lost Origin. Honestly, big power move by fucking Rayquaza. This card was sitting at $238.31 in January. Basically more than doubled its price in June, sitting at $542.77. It has then dropped $142, sitting at $401.46. Really, really crazy. A $400 card, and we're not even going to stop there because we have way, way more expensive cards to come. Then we have the Espeon V. We got at $68.92 back in January. Has gone up to $114.65 in May, and then dropped back down to $90.96. These cards, again, are just falling, but really with this Espeon, I can't see actually any of these evolutions really dropping all that much in value. We have the Glaceon V at $56.71 back in January, went up to $101.59 in June, and today sits at $80.16, which really isn't that bad of a price, only about like $24 more than what it was in January. Still, that's $24. You could buy an alt art for that, a cheap one. So just be aware of that. You have the Glaceon VMAX at $149.68. Today is its highest point at $313.89, doubled in value. Then we have the Leafeon V at $55.27 in January, jumped up to $94.99 in May, and then went back down to $78.11. So basically is $23 more than it was in January. You have the Leafeon VMAX that was sitting at $163.64 in January, jumped up to $356.94 in June. So again, just doubled in value, and has really only gone down $25 to $324.75. This card really hasn't even moved all that much. Then we have the Sylveon V at $58.18 back in January, jumped up to $94.84 in June, and then has gone down to $86.93. Really, that was only $8 less than what it was, and is still sitting about $30 or so than what it was in January. So just another card that's kind of iffy to buy. It's just if you missed out, you missed out, and that's kind of how it was with these evolutions. Then in the final three of Evolving Skies, we have the Sylveon VMAX at $133.97 in January, went up to $269.88 in June, and then dropped down to $210.21, basically dropped down $50, but that's still about $70-$80 more than what it was in January. Just another card that unfortunately you're gonna have to pay a lot of money to get now. Then we have the Umbreon V at $91.11 back in January. That card used to be like a $70-$80 card, I think, or no, like a $60-$70 card, and then some people said it was their favorite, and then that card went to $90, and then that card went to $190, really $193.83 at its highest point, and then has dropped down to $145.28 where it sits today. So it has gone down a good amount, but this card to me is definitely not worth picking up until it hits probably around 100 again. And then finally, to close out Evolving Skies, we have its most expensive card in the set, the Umbreon VMAX. The Moonbreon was at $535.76 in January, almost doubled in price, going to $958.67 in May. There were actually listings all around for this card that were going for over $1,000 in raw, which was pretty crazy. But on TCG Player, that's what's saying its highest point is. And then it has now gone down about $100 to $841.13. Still a ridiculous price. We will probably see this card dropping in value, probably around to $600. I would think probably back to what it's normal. But if that were the case, then most of these cards would probably drop back to their normal. So again, it's just one of those things you can't really predict the market. You can just hope and assume that these cards are going to fall back down again. Going over to the Fusion Strike, the set that had 9 alt arts and a shit ton were stolen. We begin with probably the two most disgusting, cheapest alt arts that you probably would not even bother to buy. We have the Greedent V was sitting at $5.82. Its highest point was sitting at $11.13 in June. Another just price that you could easily buy. And now today sits at $8.01 in the middle. And again, just another card you could buy right now. So really nothing stopping you except for the fact that it's Greedent. And we have Sandaconda V, which is even, believe it or not, worse than Greedent. And that card was sitting at $2.89 before the boom. Basically, there were just regular V cards that were worth more than this alt art. In May, at its highest point, was sitting at $8.10. Actually was worth something. And then divide that by 2, and that's what it's at today at $4.25. Really not too respectable, but it's a $5. I mean, you can go and get a $5 biggie bag, or you can get a fucking Sandaconda V. You tell me what's worth more to you. Then we have the Genesect V at $12.79 in January. Went up about $8 to $20.88 in June, and then has gone down $4 to $16.80. Another card that just kind of sits in the middle of what it was. And it's really just, again, not a bad pickup. It's cheap. It's affordable. Just like the Celebi, which is actually a really gorgeous card, and I would have thought would be worth a lot more. This card went for $25.88 in January, jumped up to $47.31 in June, and went down to $30.69. This is definitely a card to buy now. It's only $5 more than what it was in January, has dropped a lot, and potentially might continue to drop back to $25, but I think right now it's at a fair price to definitely buy. And same goes with the Inteleon VMAX, a VMAX. And this card was $20.64 back in January, went up $8 to $28.11 in May, which is just crazy to me to think that this VMAX alt art only went up that much. And it's a pretty gorgeous alt art. Then it went back down to $23.09 today, so really it's like $3 more than what it was, and you could probably bargain to get it for $18, you know, less than what it was in January if you try. So this card is definitely worth a pickup. Then we have the Espeon VMAX sitting at $122.86 back in January, more than doubled in price to $344.66 in June, just like all the other evolutions in Evolving Skies, though this one being Infusion Strike has dropped down to $253.53, so about $100 less than what it was, which is pretty crazy. I think that was probably the biggest drop out of all the evolutions besides the Umbreon VMAX, so that's pretty crazy. But this card is still such a great card to have, and I think is kind of an underrated card considering it's just the last evolution you need besides the promos to get all the evolutions that aren't in Evolving Skies. So definitely a card that I would think would be worth more. We have the Gengar VMAX, the most expensive card in this set, was sitting at $214.51 in January, went up to $409.32 in May, and then dropped $100, sitting today at $300.01. Unfortunately, this is a card that I really wanted but did not spend the money for it, and now I am biting myself in the ass. I don't think I can pay $300. I'll probably wait. If this card might hit $250, then I'll jump on it, but and that's even a maybe. I don't even know if I'll jump on it at $250. It's just so expensive. So it's one of those things. If you have the money, then by all means. But just $300, $200 is just crazy for an alt art. It makes sense, but it's just so crazy. And we have the Mew V at $26.97 in January, went up to $58.87 in May, and then has gone back down to $35.74. It really is only $10 more than what it was back in January, and it's a pretty cool card of Mew V just running with the squad. It's not a bad card, way better looking than its VMAX counterpart. It sits at $64.06 back in January, then jumped up to $103.03 in May. Would never pay for that at all. At that price, not even worth it, and has gone down to $88.35 today. Really only $20 less
if anything, than what it was, and kind of like $20 more than what it was back in January. So to me, again, this card really isn't worth it. I'm probably just gonna wait to see if this card will even get back down to 60 before I buy it. Now going to the smaller sets that have a less amount of alt arts. We start with the Brilliant Stars. I don't know whose brilliant idea it was to only give this set 4 alt arts, but they did that, so there you go. We start with the Arceus V, which was sitting at 2603 in January. At its highest point was at 5726 in May, and today sits at 2772, only $1 more than what it was in January. I really love this alt art. I think it's so gorgeous, and to me, I would think its lowest price would be around 50 bucks. So to have it at practically $25 is crazy to me. Definitely a card to jump on, in my opinion. Then we have the Charizard V, which is kind of questionable in price. This card at its lowest point back in January was sitting at 122.03, went up to its highest point at 199.55 in May, practically 200 bucks, and now has gone down to 144.22, so it has dropped by about $60 and is only $20 more than what it was in January. This card, it depends. I can still see this card possibly fall in value, but again, it's a Charizard card, so who knows? It could stop and go back up again. It just all depends. And if, you know, for $20 more, this card could be worth it, but it could still drop back down to 122. So to me, it's kind of iffy on whether you want to make that call or not. Then we have the Honchkrow V sitting at 637 back in January, jumped up to 1038 in June, and now sits at 809 today. Really just sitting at its median price, and it's a cheap card, so you might as well buy it. Then you have the Lumineon V card, which I can't pronounce. At its lowest point in January was sitting at 1306, went up to 2290 in June, not too bad, and then dropped back down to 1609. Another card that just kind of sits in the middle of what it was, and again, just another pretty decent card to add to your collection, not too bad in price. Going on over to one of the most hated, for some reason, sets in Sword and Shield with Astral Radiance. I don't really know if it's the most hated, but I just know not too many people care about Astral Radiance. Has 6 alt arts, starting with the Beedrill V, was at 1752 in January, went up to 48.99 in April, which is pretty crazy of a price. That's $40 more than what it was for just a Beedrill. And then went down to 30.06 today. So really, to me, I'm not even touching this card until it hits around 20 bucks. It's really only $13 more than what it was back in January, but to me, it's just like, it's Beedrill. I don't know who thinks like Beedrill is a good Pokemon. It's a bug Pokemon. Like, those Pokemon just get like wiped clean easily. That's besides the point. Then we have the Machamp V at 84.82 back in January, went up to 190.95 in June, doubled in price, a little bit more than that, and then went down to 133.96. I wouldn't even look at this card at $200, and I still wouldn't look at this card at $133. I don't like this card at all, and I'm kind of gonna wait till it gets back down to 80 bucks before I even jump on it. Then we have the Hisuian Lilligant V that was at 1070 in January, went up $6 to 1694 in May, and then has gone back down to 1141. Basically the same price as it was back in January. Definitely not a bad pickup, and a really gorgeous card as well. Then you have the Hisuian Sneasler V. Weird ass name, weird ass looking Pokemon. Was $20.23 in January, went up to $33.82 in May, and then has dropped down $29.89, basically $4 less than what it was in May, and only $9 more than what it was in January. So for 10 bucks, I guess it's not that bad of a card. A lot better than Beedrill, but I mean, that's my opinion. Then you have the Origin Form Pokemon, the Legendaries. You got the Olga V, which was at $24.86, a card that I've preached a million times was so undervalued. Went up to $51.92 in June. Really thought that was going to be like the start of its climb, and then just went back down to $34.03. So basically $10 more than what it was. This card honestly could continue falling back again to like $24 or so. Really sad that this card is so cheap, but to me, I'm still holding on to all of mine, and if I see them for cheap, I'll buy them, because I really think this card is worth like $100. Like, it's it's a V card. It's, you know, not that great, but it is a legendary, and it's a cool legendary. I love Dialga. It's one of probably the more popular legendaries, so to me, it just, I would think this card would be worth more money. And then same goes with the Palkia V, sitting at $30.95 back in January. Only went up $14 to $44.40 in May, and then dropped down about $6 to $38.86. Kind of sitting in a median range there. Not bad of a pickup, but still, it's up to you if you want to spend a little bit more money. It could possibly just drop down again. Then going into one of the more disgusting sets, worse than Astral Radiance, you have Pokemon Go. People are trying to get rid of Pokemon Go. They'll give it to you for free. They don't even want it. You have the Conkeldurr V. If you thought the snake Pokemon, whatever the fuck its name is, I already forgot, was bad, this one is just as bad, probably even worse. This card was sitting at $2.23 in January, went up to $3.97 in April, $1, basically went up $1, and then dropped back down to $2.84 where it sits today. This definitely is a Conkeldurr slander channel, easily. I will be the biggest hater of this card because this card is pretty basic and pretty fucking ugly. Then we have the Mewtwo V, another like looking card that a lot of people are going crazy over at Pokemon Go. This card really hasn't moved all that much, was at $16.27 back in January, went up to $29.73 in May, probably the most expensive this card will ever be in its lifetime, and then went back down to $18.62, so really only $2 more than what it was in January. Again, it's another alt art that really just didn't move all that much if you look at it in the long term, so definitely a card that if you don't have, you can buy, no problem. Then we move over to Lost Origin, a fan favorite set that only has 4 alt arts, starting with the Aerodactyl V. This card was sitting at $85.02 back in January, went up to $139.32 in May, and has dropped down to $106.23. Not a bad buy, but not a good buy either. I would probably wait, in my opinion, till this card goes further down in value. But really $106, basically you could probably get it for $100, isn't too bad. It's just whether or not you think this V card is worth $100. Then we have the Rotom V card, which I don't know how the hell this card still holds up in value. I think it's probably just because the art looks nice, or maybe it's playable. But to me, this card is still just way too damn pricey. Back in January, this card was sitting at $28.53, went up to $44.44 in May, and then has gone down a few dollars to $37.58. Really, this card sits everywhere for around like $40. You'll see this card, and to me, I think this card's worth like a $15 card, $20 at most. So I'm just praying this card drops back down, and maybe I could possibly get it for like $25 if I'm lucky. But just crazy how much this card is still worth. $37 isn't crazy price, but to me, it's just, I don't think this card is that valuable, to be honest. Then we got the most expensive card in the set, which I kind of think is a little overrated in a weird way. We have the Giratina V. Again, this is just a V card, not even a V Max, and because of that, I always thought that the Rayquaza V Max was the better and more expensive card to get, the more valuable one, and today it turns out that that is the case, but just by a little bit, the Giratina V is still holding on pretty well, with sitting at $247.79 in January, doubled in price to $480.71 in May, and then has gone down about $100 to $388.84. This is still too high for my liking. I would probably not even look at it till it hits $250, and that's basically dropping back down to what it was before in January. Then to finish out Lost Origin, we have the Galarian Berserker V, which is kind of a weird card to hold value. I kind of feel like this card would only be like a $5 or $10 card, but no, believe it or not, this card is $15.18. Really nothing too crazy, and that was back in January, but went up to $22.87 in May, and then dropped down a few dollars to $19.89. So basically a $20 bill will get you the Galarian Berserker V. To finish out the sets, we have a very controversial set with Silver Tempest with 4 alt arts. Starting off with the most controversial card, I guess, would be the Lugia V, which is also the most expensive card in the set. Back in January, this card was sitting at $128.12. Now, if you guys remember, this card was a $200 card, and then Pokemon did a little thing where basically, I think it was Silver Tempest packs that were in a chest like a lunchbox product. We're guaranteed to get you pulls, and a lot of people pulled alt arts, especially Lugia. So this card heavily went down in value to where it was sat at 128.12 in January. But the alt art craze said, fuck that, let's double it in value, give it to the next person. Went up to $227.40 in May, and then dropped down to $172.98. I can see this card hitting around $150, and then that's really not too bad of a price point, only really $20 more than what it was in January. At that point, I would probably pick it up, but really at $172.98, I would probably wait. Could go either way, up or down in value. And we got the Skunk Tank V at $565 back in January, went up to $955 in May, and then went back down to $656, only $1 more than what it was. Definitely another card that is worth buying. You have the Regidrago V, which was at $12.31 in January, went up to $23.97 in June, and then back down to $20.26. It's a card that sits in the middle, but it's a legendary, it's cheap. Definitely a card just to buy, because why not? Then you have the Unknown V at $13.07, went up to $31, and then back down to $15.75 where it sits today. This definitely is a card to buy, especially with how high it went up. Kind of shocking, and then just dropped back down to almost what it was. Before I lose my voice, and last but not least, we have the promos, which there are 9 of them. Starting with the evolutions, we have the Flareon V at $19.22 in January, went up to $53.69 in May, and then back down to $27.32, so $10 more than what it was, practically around there. That's kind of what we're gonna see with all of these. We have the Flareon V Max at $18.94, went up to $38.93 in May, and then back down to $24.66 where it sits today. We have the Jolteon V at $15.70 in January, went up to $40.06 in May, and then back down to $22.23. Then the Jolteon V Max at $22.42 in January, went up to $47.06 in May, and then back down to $32.52. We have the Vaporeon V at $22.42 back in January, went up to $53.41 in May, and then back down to $27.11. And then the Vaporeon V Max at $30.86 in January, went up to $48.76 in May, and then back down to $35.61. So all of these cards have went up and then back down, and because they are promos, because they come in special boxes, they are going to be cheaper than all the other evolutions, but they are still very gorgeous, and the boxes are very collectible. So definitely not a bad purchase to just get these if you still haven't. And then last but not least, the Charizards that specifically came in the Charizard UPC, starting with the Charizard V Alt Art at $577 in January, went up to $740 in June, only a couple dollars, and then went down $1 to $663 where it sits today. You have the Charizard V Max at $14.16 in January, went up $1 to $15.11 in April, and then down $2 to $13.29. I think this might actually be the one and only card that is actually cheaper now than what it was in January, so that's pretty crazy. And lastly, to finish this video, we have the Charizard V-Star at $9.62 in January, went up to $15.21 in May, and then back down to $11.81 where it sits today. All of these promo cards are not that bad in value, and if you're missing most of them, I would probably suggest just outright buying the promos, not even wasting your money on the boxes. The boxes did have some pretty good pulls, but really it's not worth it, and that's more for the evolutions. As far as the Charizard UPC, pulls are shit. Every UPC pulls are shit, so I would definitely just buy the singles. UPC is a cool product to just keep sealed, but definitely not to open and hope to God that you'll pull some shit from ripping packs.
I can't believe we just went through all of Sword and Shield in one video. My phone's about to have a stroke. I'm about to have a stroke. I'm already losing my voice. And even after this, there will still be the YouTubers glazing the shit out of alt arts, and because that's all they know. They live, they breathe, they die alt arts and hype and shit. And you know, what was the beginning thing with this? It was just people were saying, "Oh my God, these alt arts are going to the moon." Blah 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 blah. And I was like, well, you know, they're probably going to drop in value. Don't FOMO. They did. I mean, the expensive cards went up. They doubled in price, and those are going to be hard to get. But some of these cards were kind of like to be expected in a way, especially with Evolving Skies, with just how crazy that set is. But we are seeing these cards come down. We are basically starting to fall from the roller coaster, not like falling to our death, but, you know, we're on the ride going up. We saw the peak of the hype, and now we're slowly going down to where these cards are falling in value. But in a year or so, there's probably going to be more YouTubers and another just big soar in price. So be prepared for that.